Thank you very much, Hannah, for that lovely introduction and for the quotation. I have no recollection of it, whatever, of course. As I was listening to it, I thought, God, I could have written that a year ago, and it's always so agitating to realize that you just keep writing the same book. You're not getting any smarter. You're under the illusion that it's this upward arc, but no, it's already all there at the beginning. So I'm going to be giving a talk that's going to have quite a bit of visual material accompanying it, but it's only going to kick in about halfway through. The death to which National Socialism subjected 6 million Jews and a vast number of other people was the final stage in a process of extreme de-individuation. It occurred only after the deportees had been stripped of freedom, name, dignity, symbolic position, possessions, clothing, hair, and identity papers. And this was only part of a larger assault on temporality. Whether or not they were given over to mass murder, the Nazi camps functioned to abolish the future. The death camps did so by terminating life, the concentration camps by abolishing tomorrow. In his book, Holocaust Testimonies, The Ruins of Memory, Lawrence Langer quotes the following remark from a camp survivor. In normal life, you think about tomorrow and after tomorrow, and about a year and next year of vacation. Here you think on the moment what it is, what happens now on the moment. Now is horrible. You don't think later. Primo Levi describes the same temporal constriction in Survival in Auschwitz. Quote, for everybody, the moment of entry into the camp was a starting point of a different sequence of thoughts, those near and sharp, continually confirmed by present experience, like wounds reopened every day. For us, history had stopped. National Socialism assailed time from the other direction as well. It attacked yesterday by destroying synagogues, religious practices, family ties, rituals, books, and other vehicles for the transmission and memorialization of a collective past. But it also attempted to liquidate its victims' personal recollections. Lawrence Dupre suggests that this last target may even have been its primary one, that, quote, the entire history of the brief millennial Reich was a war against memory. Although the members of the same family, generation, nation, and culture may have many things in common, history is not one of them. Every person experiences the same events differently. She also remembers unique aspects of them and imparts to them a meaning which is peculiar to her. Since this particularity is the core of subjectivity, the final solution was never final until it had been wiped out. As James Young suggests, it was not enough for National Socialism to erase its victims' memories. It also attempted to replace them with a series of standardized and undifferentiated recollections. Quote, Hitler never planned to forget the Jews, but rather to supplant their memory of events with his own, he writes. Total liquidation would not have come through the Jews' physical annihilation only, or in the expunction of all reference to them afterward, but only by eradicating the Jewish type of memory, close quote. Young's invocation of a type in this context might seem worrisome, not only because of its racial connotations, but also because it appears to oppose one kind of standardization with another. We should not forget, though, that it was a Jewish writer who first described for us the operations of personal memory and who helped us to understand its importance, Marcel Proust. In Swann's Way, Proust insists upon the irreplaceability of every element in his mnemonic reserve and upon his unwillingness to relinquish even the smallest of its details. Quote, "If I were seized with a desire to revisit the Guermantes way," he writes, "it would not be satisfied were I to be led to the banks of a river in which there were water lilies as beautiful or even more than those in the Vivonne. What I want to see again is the Guermantes way as I knew it, with the farm that stood a little apart from the neighboring farms, huddled side by side at the entrance to the Oak Avenue, those meadows in which, when they are burnished by the sun to the luminescence of a pond, the leaves of the apple trees are reflected, the whole landscape whose individuality grips me with a power that is almost uncanny." Close quote. This and other passages from Remembrance of Things Past encourages us to understand the phrase Jewish type of memory as a synonym for that type of memory whose essence is to be atypical, a kind of memory that belongs to all of us. The Nazi assault on its victims' memories was terrifyingly effective. The narrowing down of the forced laborer's optic to the now, along with the routinized nature of her daily existence, meant that the only past to which she could have access was one which was a mirror image of the present. I would imagine that life in Guantanamo Bay is very much like this at the moment. And the brutally public circumstances under which she was forced to eat, work, and sleep, along with the fact that the activities were simultaneously repeated by countless others around her, meant that even this past was one to which she could make no personal claim. During her extended stay in Auschwitz, Charlotte Delbo engaged in all kinds of elaborate exercises to retain her memories. She constantly repeated to herself all the telephone numbers she knew, all the metro stations along one line, and, quote, all the boutiques along the Rue Caumartin between the Athénée Theater and the Havre Caumartin metro station. In spite of this, her recollections faded away and were replaced by the commonplaces of the camp. Quote, "My memory finds only cliches. Where are you, my real memory? Where are you, my earthly memory?" she cries at one point in her memoirs. It was not only during their internment that the inmates of German concentration camps had difficulty accessing and retaining what was most specific to themselves, but afterwards as well. Writing shortly after the war, Primo Levi maintains that survivors generally belonged to one of two groups: those who could remember only their camp experiences and those who had virtually no access to the past. It is hardly surprising, in light of National Socialism's attack on memory, that many of the first camp memoirs should have recounted the same story and adhered to the same formal conventions, and even that there was a certain policing of that narrative on the part of survivors, a sense that you weren't really there unless you told a particular kind of narrative. The crucial project with respect to this period has consequently always seemed to me to be the recovery of these memories, not the establishment of an objective account of what happened in the camps. The notion that it is only through remembering that we can achieve a lasting victory over National Socialism is hardly new. It is the informing assumption behind most camp testimonies, Jewish museums, and memorials, as well as scholarly books on the Holocaust. There are, of course, many reasons for this. First, most camp memories were traumatic in nature. They retain the perceptual vividness of the experiences to which they attested and returned with compulsive and incapacitating regularity. These memories had to be repeated in a linguistic form in order to be domesticated and bound. Survivors also needed to re-articulate the terms of the group identity which had been imposed upon them to effect the transition from thinking of themselves as helpless members of a despised race to seeing themselves precisely as survivors. They could only do so by recalling what they had lived through and somehow triumphed over. Verbal memories of the camp were also the primary means both of communicating with the others with whom one had shared so much and of escaping the isolation which re-entry into civilian life so often and excruciatingly entailed. Almost immediately, for better or worse, they also became the legacy around which a new nation cohered, the nation of Israel. For many survivors, verbal recollections also initially constituted a way of bearing witness about the camp to those who did not know or did not want to know about what happened there. As Levy writes early in Survival in Auschwitz, the need to tell our story to the rest, to make the rest participate in it, had taken on for us before our liberation and after the character of an immediate and violent impulse to the point of competing with our other elementary needs. This book has been written to satisfy this need. Close quote. With the deaths of so many survivors and the aging of the rest, this project has assumed a renewed urgency. It has also assumed a new function, the function of transmitting a crucial legacy from the dying to those who will live on in their stead. Surprisingly, given the painful nature of this legacy, these later testimonials have often been recorded at the behest of those untouched by the camps rather than the survivors themselves. Levy writes at one point that there are no witnesses to the witnesses, but this is what some of the literal and metaphoric children and grandchildren of the camp's generation are offering to be. But can those who weren't there bear witness to what happened? Do they not lack the necessary experiential base? Interestingly, Levy suggests that this question could also have been posed to the survivors themselves. The simple fact that they were alive when the camps were liberated showed that they did not touch bottom. That is, that they never occupied the non-place into which the Nazis attempted to assert them. Those who did were immediately consigned to death, first psychically and then physically. The closest a survivor could come to witnessing this void at the heart of the concentration camps was to view it from the outside. This was a harrowing experience since every concentration camp inmate feared becoming a Muslim herself, and because the Nazis preyed on this fear. Levy, however, bravely assumes this responsibility and testified to what he saw, underscoring the state of non-differentiation to which National Socialism attempted to reduce its victims. Quote from Levy, "All the Musliman who finished in the gas chambers have the same story, or more exactly, have no story. They, the drowned, form the backbone of the camp, an anonymous mass continually renewed and always identical of non-men who march and labor in silence, the divine spark dead within them. They crowd my memory with their faceless presences, and if I could enclose all the evil of our time in an image, I would choose this image, which is familiar to me, with head dropped and shoulders curved, on whose face and in whose eyes no trace of thought is to be seen." But this is to present seeing and hearing in strictly negative terms as a kind of second best when it comes to bearing witness. It is my view that these activities can give us not only rich and complex access to the past, but also a unique kind of agency. By looking at and listening to what the victims of the camps have to tell us, we can lift them out of the non-place to which the latter assigned them and return them to the world. We can thus make history happen again in a new form. Dory Laub and Shoshana Fellman provide us with a partial model for understanding the performative potential inherent in the activities of looking and listening. They suggest that a camp testimony is more than a description of what happened there. It is also an appeal on the part of the speaker to be recognized in a way which restores her subjectivity to her. As Laub puts it in Bearing Witness, or the Vicissitudes of Listening, quote, testimonies are not monologues. They cannot take place in solitude. The witnesses are talking to somebody they have been waiting for a long time, close quote. It is primarily by being this somebody that we can keep faith with those brutalized by the camps. Laub invokes Martin Buber's notion of the thou in an attempt to describe the kind of listener for whom the survivor is looking. For Buber, there are two kinds of pronominal units, the I, it, and the I, you. They constitute radically different ways of interacting with other people. The word you is constitutive of personhood. When we address someone with it, we are acknowledging their right to say I in turn. With the word it, along with the variants he, she, on the other hand, we relegate another person to the position of a non-person. It's also an argument that Émile Benveniste makes, that the third person pronoun is the pronoun of non-personhood. It would be hard to find a more exemplary version of the second of these relations, that is the I-it, than that adopted by the Nazis toward their victims. Jewish corpses did not represent for them the remains of human beings, but rather figuren, objects in another form. What survivors are waiting for, and not just the survivors I'm talking about here, but all kinds of other survivors, is the opposite of this, someone who is prepared to confer the you upon them. Within this original and important account of what it means to bear witness, the power to create subjectivity is shifted from the first person pronoun to the second, and from the activity of speaking to that of listening. In Laub's view, it is the analyst who best instantiates this sought-for interlocutor. She performs this function by providing the blank screen upon which the past can be, quote, inscribed for the first time, close quote, in a knowable form. But since the real role of the analyst witness is to occupy the position of the listener until the analysant is finally able to occupy it herself, Lacan's early seminars would probably be more clarifying than Laub's account of this therapeutic notion of bearing witness. Every analyst, Lacan suggests there, ideally says, there where I am, you too can come to be, just as each of us implicitly does when we address another person as you. As this last formulation makes clear, an exchange of this sort entails a fascinating kind of catachresis. Listening becomes a way of speaking, and speaking a way of listening. In Laub's model, the survivor's I returns to her from the sight of the interlocutor in a new form. The performative potential of the first-person pronoun has been renewed. However, this theoretical paradigm has no place for those who died in the camps. It also offers no means of accessing those memories which derive from a moment anterior to the camps. It can consequently conjure forth only a generalized subjectivity. The aesthetic domain is more accommodating in both respects. Certain works of art make it possible for us to reclaim the memories which were incinerated along with the corpses of those killed in the camps, whether they belong to the living or the dead. One such work of art is Charlotte Solomon's extraordinary Life or Theater, a musical drama. Could we have I have this, don't I? Is the slide projector on? Okay. One such work of art is Charlotte Solomon's extraordinary Life or Theater, a musical drama. Is it okay? In this book, which is comprised of a vast number of watercolor paintings, an ongoing verbal narration, and instructions as to the kind of music the reader should play in her head as she reads, a young girl recounts the last few years of her life almost at the very moment at which she lives them. Her story ends just before her capture by the Nazis and her death in Auschwitz. And I'll show you, we've got 4 more slides. So just leave it up for about 5 seconds. They're working? Yeah. Okay. They are? Okay, and then just please put the last one up and just leave it. Like Proust, Solomon retreated from the world in order to write her book. The story she recounts is also intensely private. National Socialism intrudes into it only near the very end, and even then is confined to the margins. Finally, like Proust, Solomon experienced her life primarily in the form of a mnemonic inscription, so much so that she paid little heed to the noose that was tightening around her throat. But this seemingly suicidal disregard of the political had a profoundly political motivation. Solomon was determined to transmit her singularity to the spectator so that it would still be here when she was gone. As its title suggests, Life or Theater defines itself as a theatrical event capable of being staged in the absence of its author, but dependent for a viewer-listener for its completion. It is, of course, we can maybe go backwards to the very first one and just sort of hold on that. It is, of course, a feature of every aesthetic work to float free of its source and tend toward the receptor. However, Life or Theater is unusual in that what it detaches from the former and directs toward the latter is its author's memories. As in Remembrance of Things Past, moreover, these memories are explicitly marked as her own. Finally, they constitute that part of Solomon which was simultaneously most under attack by the political forces bearing down upon her and most capable of surviving this attack. By exteriorizing her memories in the form of a book about her life, Solomon makes possible the conditions whereby we can bear witness to her. In order for this possibility to become a reality, however, we must become the particular somebody for whom these recollections are waiting. This does not mean becoming the blank screen onto which they are projected or the empty receptacle into which they are poured. If we want to be adequate to Solomon's appeal, we must claim her memories, make them part of our own. The rest of this talk will be devoted to a closely related body of work, Peter Forgash's video films. Would you please turn off? Yeah. Like Life or Theater, each of these films exteriorizes at least one person's private recollections in a form which is accessible to other viewers. Many of these recollections derive from a Jewish subject, although not all of them, and they focus on the period prior to this subject's deportation and, at least in one case, death. Unlike life or theater, though, the memories which these works house belong to other people. In 1988, Peter Forgash began making a series of video films entitled Private Hungary. This series, which now includes 12 separate but interrelated works, has as its primary focus Hungarian private life during World War II, the decade leading up to it, and the socialist period that followed. Most of the images in these works came from footage shot by amateur cameramen of their families, friends, and travels during a period extending from 1929 until approximately 1969, i.e., from home movies. And there was a very, very active amateur photography culture in Budapest, actually not just there, as it turns out in many other parts of Europe as well. But Forgash also intercut some of this material with newsreel footage and other kinds of found footage. More recently, Forgash has also made a series of video films using home movie footage taken by amateur cameramen in other European countries. Maelstrom, which focuses on a Dutch Jewish family. Meantime Somewhere, which draws upon material coming from a range of European countries and a range of ethnicities. Land of Nothing, whose primary military images were shot by a Hungarian soldier who was sent to the Russian front, which is an unbelievably dark film. The Danube Exodus, whose first half consists of footage shot by the captain of a ship used for the transport of 1,100 European Jews to Palestine. They were stranded in the middle of the Danube. No European country would let them move down the Danube so they could get to a point of get to a point where they could sail away. And this captain just photographed everything. Their babies born, weddings occur, people just sitting in the sun. It's really an extraordinary film. An Angelos film, which is assembled out of the home movies of an Athenian aristocrat before and during the German occupation of Athens. Was another amateur photographer. He carried his camera around in his rations can. It was extraordinarily dangerous. He developed and because he was a patrician, could afford a private studio, but did all of this at the risk of losing his life. In his own comments on the home movie footage out of which he makes his film, Forgash stresses its upper middle class origins. In Europe before the war, only wealthy families had both the financial means to buy cameras and a sufficient sense of self-importance to believe that their lives were worthy of being filmed. This wealth is very much on display in some films, such as Story of a Lady, Angelos's film, and the Bartos family. But in all three cases, the footage which Forgash shows us attests at a narrative level to divestiture and loss, either as a result of World War II or the communist regime which followed it in Hungary. Story of a Lady describes from the point of view of a Hungarian aristocratic woman the privileged and luxurious life she lived both before and during World War II and the penury to which she was reduced in 1949 and her complete incapacity to process any of that. The Bartos family Forgash relates the narrative of a similar decline in fortune, but now from the very different vantage point of a Jewish dynasty, and in Angelos's film, that of a Greek patrician's transition from social and political eminence to exile. The losses documented in Maelstrom and Free Fall, and I'll be showing you some footage from those films in a few minutes, are much more devastating. In each of these video films, Forgách recounts the story of a Jewish family which was almost completely wiped out by National Socialism. But even the non-Jewish figures whose home movies Forgách shows us are for the most part dead, and the Europe they depict no longer exists, either because of World War II, East Bloc communism, or the end of the Cold War. For all of these reasons, the memorial value of the images he includes in his films far exceed their capacity to connote wealth and privilege. Forgách refers to the collection he has created out of other people's home movies as a private film archive. We could spend a lot of time unpacking that phrase. He thereby underscores those aspects of it which would seem most to disqualify it for the purposes to which he puts it. The home movie camera woman generally pulls out her camera only at special moments. She therefore leaves most of her life unrecorded, with the exception of those occasions like weddings when the private becomes public. Home movies are also more concerned with the personal than the social. They are generally focused on domestic events, or at least upon occurrences whose meaning and value are available only to a small community. As Forgách himself notes, because of its mysterious ellipses and the primacy it gives to visual communication, this cinematic form also, quote, recalls the structure of dreams, its system of symbols, and the means of the dream work, close quote. But Forgách is not interested in recounting history in any of the usual ways. The big moments of the past century are always present in his films. We are never allowed to lose sight of the fact that the people whose images we have seen have been or are about to be engulfed by the fires of National Socialism or East Bloc communism. And I just want to show the first clip now, which comes from Maelstrom, which will give you some sense of how those big events shadow or shade the private in these films. So this is a film from 1996. Oh. Sound? This is about a Dutch family, a Dutch Jewish family. These large-scale events, however, remain curiously decentered. Forgách generally informs us about them only intermittently, and even then through a government announcement, the text of a law, a radio broadcast, white titles, or a disembodied voiceover, rather than the images out of which he weaves his video films. Official history is also almost always in thematic tension with what we are given to see, and Forgách throws his aesthetic weight behind the private rather than the public, either through the music, subtitles, or another more personal voiceover. The Hungarian director marginalizes official history for several reasons. First and foremost, he refuses to give National Socialism and Hungarian communism center stage because of what happened when their narratives triumphed over personal memory. Like National Socialism, East Bloc communism attempted not only to kill everyone who did not fit into its master narratives, psychically as well as physically, but also to eradicate every form of difference, whether social, political, philosophical, aesthetic, economic, domestic, or libidinal. And his films from that later period are quite extraordinarily eloquent on that topic. But Forgage wants us to understand also that time does not unfold through a collective narrative. What Lyotard calls the grand récit are, in a sense, tenantless structures. No subject really lives there, either at the time they are ostensibly happening or later. Each of us inhabits a unique position in the world, both factically and mnemonically. Each of us also experiences a different duration. For Ducey and Yeno, the central figures in one of Forgage's video films, the time, this whole period of time, was measured not according to the length and various episodes of the war, but rather according to the number of years each of their dogs lived, something I can relate intensely to. For the soldier photographer in Land of Nothing, time was defined more by the time between battles and the brief period at home than the time spent fighting. And for the mother in Diary of Mr. N, the birth of a new child represented a far more important temporal marker than any contemporaneous political event. Forgage has devised a number of formal strategies for conveying the temporal specificity of the material with which he works, the multiple durations. In Either Or, which covers a later period, the period of Hungarian communism. I'm going to show you a clip from this in just a second. There's a photographer who has two transgressive loves in it, whom he photographs obsessively. One is his best friend's wife, and the other is his daughter named Baby. And so, at any rate, they are obsessively photographed by him, although there's also a lot of footage of communist demonstrations, marches, the invasion of Soviet tanks into Hungary, etc., and has a very strong sense of life in that moment. But Forgage gives us these very evocative moments memorializing Baby, the daughter of the photographer, the central character, Mr. G. And I want to show you a clip in just a second. In this particular one that we're about to look at, he uses slow motion to try to bring us into the duration, the particular sense of duration that Mr. N's relationship to his daughter entailed, and freezes it at moments of unusual radiance. So let's look at this sequence, which ends the film Either Or. It's going to be a little longer than the ones we've looked at so far. Let me just quickly set it up. Baby was Mr. G's daughter and second love, and in this sequence she is shown dancing on a revue stage as a member of a chorus line. I did the wrong thing, obviously. Just a few remarks about what we just looked at. At first, Forgosh accompanies her movements with sounds evocative of stage music and dancing feet. He isolates Baby from the other women by means of a spotlight so that she seems to be dancing in her own private moonbeam. In the last few moments of the film, he further denaturalizes this footage, eliminating all sounds but that of a lonely xylophone, and shows us Baby dancing alone in slow motion. Through these effects, the author of Either Or makes this tawdry little performer shine as brightly for us as she did for her photographer father. Not only is the footage with which Forgosh works devoted to highly personal topics, it was also created to be shown only to family members and friends. By putting it into public circulation, he might therefore seem to violate the very privacy he seeks to protect. However, the status of a home movie changes dramatically over time. Originally a highly personal memento of a past shared by the photographer and the photographic subject, both of whom it serves to re-evoke, its evidentiary value is subsequently shorn of the how, why, what, where, and when, and reduced to a simple "this was." What Krakauer writes about the photograph of an unremembered grandmother thus holds equally true for the home movie. Quote from Krakauer's essay on photography: "The grandchildren are amazed when asked to believe that it is the fragmentarily remembered ancestor whom they encounter in the photograph. All right, so it's grandmother, but in reality it is any young girl in 1864. The girl smiles continuously, yet likeness has ceased to be any help." Close quote. In order to rescue his found footage from anonymity and thereby raise all of these dead figures from the grave, Forgosh has to create a new private sphere. He does this in the only possible way, by affectively claiming the people and places whose lives his films record and making it possible for us to do the same. He creates a new private sphere out of the public, as it were. Interestingly, biography has not always provided the basis for these emotional relationships. In some of his early films, Forgosh moves freely between the material shot by one amateur photographer and that shot by another, and leaves the people and places in it unnamed. And an example of this, we're going to be seeing a number of clips now in rather close succession. An example of this is Wittgenstein's Tractatus, which we're going to look at now, and I'll describe it afterwards.
What we cannot think, that we cannot think. We cannot therefore say what we cannot think. Everything we see could also be otherwise. Everything we can describe at all could also be otherwise. That the world is my world shows itself in the fact that the limits of the language which I understand, mean the limits of my world. I am my world, the microcosm. Everything we see could also be otherwise. Everything we can describe at all could also be otherwise.
The images in Wittgenstein's Tractatus, which we just looked at, float free both of the real people whose likenesses they show and the photographers who shot them. They also cohere not by virtue of their intrinsic relationship to each other, but rather because they are linked to something, they are all linked to something external to them, Wittgenstein's Tractatus, which Forgash's disembodied voice reads on the soundtrack. But although these images have been wrenched out of their context, they still communicate a powerful referential jolt. This is in part because something within them resists our attempts to impose meaning upon them, making them the ghost-like remainder of the life which would be ours if language were not, as Wittgenstein says, the limit of our world. But it is also because the passages which Forgash reads from the Tractatus are so insistent upon the disjunctive relation of words and images, upon the impossibility not only of showing what is said, but even of translating from one register to the other. Wittgenstein's insistence that, quote, what is shown cannot be said, close quote, renders the already phenomenologically resonant images of people dancing, playing, driving a carriage, and steering a boat even more charged. In another of his video films, The Bourgeois Dictionary, from around the same moment, Forgash organizes his images generically rather than philosophically by linking fragments of his source material together under various categories and then giving them the categories titles like cards, coffee houses, high life, exercise. He transforms them into a record of bourgeois Hungarian culture from about 1930 until its demise in communism. But the real brilliance of the film resides elsewhere, in what resists this generic classification, however interesting and valuable it may be, and in the room the film makes for that resistance. Clip 4, please.
Mikor találkozunk már? Olyan régen láttalak. Igen, értem. Akkor a Gresham-ben várunk.
Here the project is not to dramatize the stubborn exteriority of images to words, but to show that many of the home movie images included in the Bourgeois Dictionary cannot be stripped of their singularity. There is something about the form itself which insists upon the private and affective, even after names and identities have been consigned to oblivion. The Bourgeois Dictionary contains a number of little self-contained sequences, each of which is structured by the relation linking the photographer, a friend, a husband, a mother, a father, to the photograph subject. This relation manifests itself, first of all, through the direct look with which the photographic subject faces the camera. I say the camera, but it is almost always the case that the photograph subject is looking not at the camera, but at the person behind the camera. This is most strikingly the case in a sequence in Bourgeois Dictionary in which a man photographs his mistress arriving at his apartment, undressing, taking a bath, and getting into bed. In this sequence, which we're going to look at now in just a second, the woman repeatedly addresses the photographer as her lover, and at the end, she overtly summons him into the bed in which she is already lying.
Mikor fejezed be már? Puszi, kihűl a víz. Te nem érted már. Elég. Fejezd be már. Gyere.
Spectacle. In Camera Lucida, Roland Barthes describes what it is to be photographed by this kind of a camera. Quote, "When I discover myself in the product of this operation," he writes, "what I see is that I have become total image, which is to say, death in person. I am not dispossessed of myself, I am turned ferociously into an object," close quote. Roland Barthes goes on to talk about the mortifying effects of this camera upon the photographed subject, the freezing of the body into the rigidified form which anticipates its photographic capture. It is not indifference, he goes on to say, which, quote, can erase the weight of this image, but love, extreme love, close quote. Extreme love is precisely what organizes the field of vision in the home movie footage in the Bourgeois Dictionary, and it is also what most resists the archival project indexed by the title. The film offers us a cinema organized around the exchange of looks between two finite, embodied, and affectively imbricated subjects, one behind and one in front of the camera, both of whom are caught up in a shared event. Thus it is that the bodies in these images finally say, not only, I was there, but I was loved. In a number of his more recent films, Forgage painstakingly reconstructs the political, legal, and economic history of the period he covers. He becomes a chronicler, laboriously stitching together the story of large families over an extended period of time. Freefall, one of the most historically detailed of these later films, is mostly made up of footage shot by the photographer who produced the little lover sequence that we have just looked at. Forgage returns this sequence to its owner by including it in Freefall, but he also claims it himself again in a new way. At several points in the film, a cantor chants the anti-Semitic laws implemented in Hungary in the years leading up to the deportation of its Jews to the German camps. The first of these laws restricted the number of Jews who could hold professional positions. The last rendered sexual relations between Jews and non-Jewish Hungarians illegal. At first, there were generous exceptions. Those who had served as soldiers in World War I or were widows of someone who were not to be included in the 20% limit placed on Jewish membership in the chambers of theater, film, lawyers, engineers, and doctors. This left Jewishness a rather amorphous category. But over time, Jewish identity was defined in more and more racial and biologically encompassing terms until it held a substantial percentage of the Hungarian population in tight pincers. Race also translated immediately into moral categories. All non-Jewish Hungarian women were later deemed to be definitionally righteous. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Who should under no circumstance copulate with Jewish men. In the event that they had already done so, their offspring were to be sacrificed for the sake of racial purity. By having a cantor sing these laws during the lover sequence, which is the last clip in which we will now look at, Forgage both ironizes them and reinstitutes the subjectivity they were created to destroy.
törvény alkalmazása szempontjából zsidónak kell tekinteni azt, aki ő maga, vagy akinek legalább egyik szülője, vagy akinek nagy
On the restriction of public and economic expansion of Jews. From Section 1. In the application of this act, that is Jewish who himself was, or at least one of his parents was, or at least two of his grandparents were, members of the Israelite denomination. Also the children of the above listed, born after the enforcement of this act.
Törvényt nem lehet alkalmazni tűzharcosra. Arra, aki az 1914-18.
The act shall not be applied to hero fighter or that who was prisoner of war in the war of 1914-18, that who was decorated with a silver or gold medal of valor in that war.
A törvényt nem lehet alkalmazni arra, aki legalább 50%-ban hadirokkant, továbbá az 1914-18. Évi háborúban ősi halált halt személy özvegye.
By having a cantor sing these laws, Forgash both ironizes them and reinstitutes the subjectivity they were created to destroy. He also detaches Jewishness from biology and reconstitutes it as a religious and cultural category. Finally, he permits the melodic properties of the music to win out over its libretto. One of the moments at which melody most fully triumphs over the libretto is during the lover sequence. At the beginning of this sequence, one registers only the sacral nature of the cantor's singing. This confers upon it an air of mystery and importance. When, intermittently, one does hear the words of the cantor song, they interact complexly with the images. The law which Forgash introduces into his film at this juncture offers an almost entirely racial definition of Jewishness. The category of those who are deemed to exceed Jewishness has shrunk considerably. Now it is not enough to have served in World War I. One must also have exhibited unusual valor. Insofar as one registers this discourse on categories and the exceptions to them, one cannot help but notice everything about this woman which defies this kind of thinking, how she adapts her body to the shape of the bathtub, the curious way in which she gives herself to the photographer but withholds herself a bit from the camera, the surprising self-assurance with which she pours herself the tiny glass of liqueur and summons her lover to bed. This little sequence consequently does even more than permit the still unnamed woman to say, "I was there and I was loved." It broadens the range of exceptions to the law which is being sung. Indeed, it suggests that there can never be anything in relation to it but exceptions. Forgash ends Freefall with a poem by Janos Polinsky, which also challenges the principle of categorization at the heart both of National Socialism and the world we ourselves inhabit. Over green-tinted, handheld footage of mountains and trees, Polinsky's own voice can be heard uttering the following words. Earth is not earth, number is not number, letter is not letter, sentence is no sentence, God is God, a flower is a flower, a swelling is a swelling, winter is winter, the fenced-in area of indefinite shape is a concentration camp. That's the end. so I'd be glad to answer questions or hear responses.